He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential trade to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio.
Aloha.
And now we return you to your host.
Hello, Dr. Salla.
Hey, Janet.
Hi. I'm going to have to do the intro.
Okay.
One moment. Aloha, Emily, and welcome to Stargate to the Cosmos. And I'm your host, Janet Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Lessin. And Teresa J. Morris may join us tonight if we can get her system to work. Our producer is Thomas Becker. So Janet Lessin, Dr. Sasha Lessin, maybe Teresa J. Morris, producer Thomas Becker, and our guest is Dr. Michael Salla. And we're always delighted to have Dr. Salla. So on our show today, we're going to concentrate on the Hawaii Emergence of False Flag event and focus on what happened and who was responsible. And we'll examine the existence of a CIA dark fleet that launched the missile and a USAF SSP, Secret Space Program, the United States Air Force Secret Space Program, that shot it down. The recent alliance between the USAF and the SSP and the Nordic extraterrestrials has been a big game changer behind the scenes. So there are several very important links on AquarianRadio.com to Dr. Salla's 3 major articles around these issues. The titles are, was a space-based weapons platform used against Hawaii inbound ballistic missile, the secret Navy behind a ballistic missile attack on Hawaii, and was a nuclear missile attack on Hawaii thwarted by a secret space program. So we're going to begin with that. Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say?
I'm eagerly awaiting to hear the latest.
Okay, great. Dr. Salla, welcome to our show. Welcome back. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks, Janet and Sasha. Wonderful to be back. Looking forward to just really getting to the bottom of what's been happening with this missile situation. As we all know, we live in Hawaii, and so we want to make sure the islands are safe.
Oh, yeah, and I am right across from Haleakala. I see them doing their testing. They usually turn on their lights between 4 and sunrise. So depending on the time of the year, I often get up to go to the bathroom and I see their bright light on and I know what it is. So, let's cut to the chase. So what in the world happened? I was there. My phone went off. There was nowhere to go. We were thinking we had 15 minutes before we die. And that was a long time before they gave the all clear. What was happening for you when that alarm went off? Were you at home in the islands?
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that because I was actually in Australia at the time.
Oh.
And my wife, Angelica, was here in on the Big Island. So I was very interested to hear. Actually, first I heard of it from Corey Good and kind of like wanted to check in whether or not it was real. And so as I started to look into it more, I found all of these conflicting messages about it. It's like people, because obviously people got this message saying that there was a ballistic missile on the way to Hawaii and that this is not a drill. And then, of course, 38 minutes later, they get another message on their phone system. Now, it's important to distinguish between, a couple of different reporting mechanisms that they have. One is the kind of like typical emergency alert system, which goes up on the website if there's something that happens, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a tidal wave or a ballistic missile alert. The Hawaiian emergency alert system, they have multiple ways of delivering that message. Of course, there's the sirens. You get the sirens, you get the phone message, the electronic alert on your phone or your electronic device. And then there's other things such as, the website, the news stations. So there are multiple ways that they deliver these messages. But the one that really got people in an uproar was that the fact that it took them all of, I think it was 38 minutes to basically send another message out on the alert system, which meant that basically if you learned about this ballistic missile, through your phone getting a message, then you didn't get a follow-up message for a whole 38 minutes. And so during that whole time, you're thinking the worst. And that's what really had people in an uproar, that it took so long to get that update. Yeah, well, some people were
on the highway going to work, and they're not going to have access to a television, so they're in the middle of the highway, especially on Oahu, Honolulu. They were jumping out of their cars and just leaving their cars there, and running to get to shelter or to get to their family, and it was very terrifying. For me, it was very surreal. It's like, okay, what's it going to feel like when it hits? Is it going to be painful? Will I be out of my body instantly? Will I be one of the survivors that dies of radiation poisoning? It was just very surreal because there's really nowhere to run. I mean, people say go get into your bathtub or something, but then you'll be in there and starve to death because, you'll be in there for weeks before there's an all clear. And how are you going to get the all clear unless you've got some kind of radio system? And anyway, none of us were prepared for that I know of. We just said, well, if I'm going to die, at least I'll grab my husband and my kitty and I'll just hold them until I, pass. That's about all you could do.
Right, and of course the Hawaiian Islands, just the way we're situated, right in the middle of the Pacific, and we have the kind of trade winds blowing in an easterly direction, which means that, if that missile, the obvious ground zero was probably Honolulu, because that's really where Pacific Command is concentrated, and the brunt of the American military is there. Another possibility was Kauai, but that would have meant that those of us living on the Big Island or Maui, we wouldn't have been affected directly from the attack. And the trade winds would have blown the radioactive clouds kind of in a westerly direction. So we wouldn't have been affected from that, but it would have meant that basically half of the island chain, which is Honolulu, Kauai, Oahu, these would have been cut off. So obviously it would have affected all of us, throughout the islands, though, and that's the thing with a nuclear attack, like the nuclear attacks against Nagasaki and Hiroshima during the Second World War. I think each attack, took out like 100,000 people, or somewhere in that vicinity, which is a lot of people to die immediately. But then, of course, you have the spillover, you have the after effects, you have the radiation, you have the poisoning of the food supply, the water supply, and a lot more deaths from that. And then you have the kind of poisonous radioactive clouds and fallout, which go down, which flow according to the wind. So, this would have been something that would have changed all our lives. But of course, thankfully, we're told that it was a false alarm, and so most most people in the islands, I think, would have just taken a belief that it was just someone pushing the.
You're breaking up. I'm not sure what we can do to improve the communication.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully that this will help. I just won't move around.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah.
So what I was saying was that in the days immediately after the false flag, and more whistleblowers started to emerge, and more witnesses started to emerge, all basically saying that, hey, no, this wasn't a false alert. Actually, it was a real attack, and that a missile had been launched, and that the missile had been taken out, and that it was the intent was a false flag attack to simulate a North Korean attack against Hawaii, and that would have obviously triggered a retaliation by the United States, which would have then led to a nuclear war in North Korea, and that could have easily escalated into a major regional war. And so it was only after the false alert was issued, most people began to relax, that the alternative media was giving us another story, a very different story. So right now in the Hawaiian Islands, you have a big division between those that just buy into the official media narrative that this was a false alert caused by a trigger-happy employee who has been sacked, and those that are following the alternative media reports, including my own exopolitics.org, saying that, hey, there's a lot of evidence here that that this actually was intended to be a false flag attack, that it was a failed false flag attack, and that someone shot down the missile. So that that raises all sorts of questions, like who, why, where, when type questions. So maybe we can walk through those questions. Yeah.
So there's a couple different theories. Directions, and you've been following them through and coming up with some conclusions. So there was one about a sub that was something left over from World War II. Anyway, could you give us the theories of the who, what, when, where, how, and why that you've tracked down?
Well, okay. Well, the key thing to keep in mind is that this was an attempted false flag attack. And I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of that, what that means. But essentially, for the false flag attack to succeed, Pacific Command in Hawaii would have had to have been convinced, or they would have looked at the attack and would have kind of come out of it saying that, okay, this was a ballistic missile launched from North Korea, and so for this attack to succeed, you really needed capabilities to simulate a North Korean ballistic missile attack. Now, at the moment, the only way North Korea can launch a ballistic nuclear missile is, they have their ground-based ballistic missile launchers there in North Korea. So you would have basically needed a ballistic missile launching submarine off the coast of North Korea that could have simulated this kind of false flag attack. And so that immediately gives us important clues, that one, it would have been an entity with submarines that could basically launch a ballistic missile that could travel the thousands of miles from, just off North Korean waters to Hawaii. And you would have...
A question. Couldn't they have been closer in anywhere out there in the Pacific, and it would be coming from that direction, but maybe not as far as North Korea?
Well, certainly they could have launched a missile, a ballistic missile from much closer. But the thing is, a ballistic missile follows a certain trajectory, and so if you wanted to simulate a North Korean attack, you would have had to have launched pretty close to North Korea in the Sea of Japan. So the submarine that was responsible for this was actually off the coast of North Korea in the Sea of Japan. And that would have been the only way that you could have had a submarine launch a false flag ballistic missile that, when it hit Hawaii and caused all the damage, that those tracking the radar, tracking surveillance data would have basically said, oh, this missile came from North Korea, and so we know who did it, and so let's retaliate. So it made sense for them to have a missile.
It's coming in and out again. Yeah, you're cutting in and out again. I don't know if you're moving around again or what. It goes in and out, and I'm not sure what's going on.
So who's got submarines that could do it? Who's got submarines capable of doing that from that distance?
Well, that's really the critical point here, Sasha, is to be able to launch a ballistic missile, you need to have what is called a boomer submarine. And these are submarines that can basically launch a vertical missile basically from the top. So you have hatches at the top of the submarine, and these ballistic missiles launch perpendicular to the submarine, straight up into the sky. And the only countries that have those ballistic missiles are major countries like United States, Russia, Britain, France, China, and most recently India. They're the only countries that at the moment have the capability to launch a ballistic nuclear missile. And so you need to have big submarines to do that. Now, there are other submarines that can launch cruise missiles from the front of the submarine, kind of like similar to how a torpedo is launched. And these these cruise launch missiles certainly they can deliver a nuclear weapon. And countries like Israel do have that capability. They recently purchased Dolphin-class submarines from Germany, and many people began speculating that the obvious culprit would have been Israel, because people say, well, Israel was behind the false flag attack in terms of the Liberty, the USS Liberty, that was a ship in 1967 that was attacked by what appeared to be Egyptian aircraft, but in fact these were Israeli aircraft trying to shoot it down. People thought that, well, Israel was behind this, but the problem there is that Israel's fleet of Dolphin submarines, I think they have 5 of them, do not have the capacity to launch ballistic missiles. They can launch cruise missiles, but not ballistic. And so that means that, put simply, that Israel does not have the capability to simulate a ballistic missile attack from North Korea on Hawaii.
So you're saying that they would have to track the trajectory, but nobody's admitting there is a missile. So if somebody was tracking it in our U.S. military, tracking this to launch this alarm, they're not fessing up. So they're already suppressing it. They're not letting us know the truth.
Definitely. This is one of the things that the whistleblowers have been saying. Each one has a slightly different take on it, but basically, and I've examined those in several of the articles. The first 2 articles on the exopolitics.org website go into the different whistleblowers that have basically come forward to talk about this. And many of them are anonymous, but they're saying that this was a real missile and it was taken down. It was shot down, and people aren't sure, well, was it shot down by a space program? Was it shot down by a missile intercept program like the Navy's Aegis missile defense system? Or was it shot down by extraterrestrials? So people are asking these questions. So in the last article I did, I referred to something that I thought was really very interesting, which was that on January 31st, actually January 30, the Navy basically conducted a test against a ballistic missile. The test was intended to shoot down the ballistic missile, and it failed. So the Navy basically released to the public that they had attempted to intercept a ballistic missile or part of a military test, and that they had failed to shoot it down. So I thought that was very significant, because I think this was the Navy's way of making it clear to the public that, hey, we didn't shoot down that ballistic missile, only 3 weeks earlier, because we're still developing our system and it's not reliable. And that was their second failure in a row. So the Navy, I think, was really kind of like signaling that someone was responsible for shooting down that missile. So that, who else could it have been? Well, then that brings us to two obvious candidates. One is an Air Force secret space program, which has a global surveillance system, or extraterrestrials.
Right. Well, that night, I was very upset about the whole thing, launched into PTSD and just running on high adrenaline all day, even though logically it was like, yeah, it didn't work, whatever. That night I had a download. I'm a ET contact since the crib, and I get lots of downloads. And my download said, and I'll just say it, that it was the U.S. launching the missile. They don't really care about Hawaii that much because it's a blue state. And that was going to be used to launch World War III. But the extraterrestrials that were communicating with me said, we shot it down. Now, I have no way to prove that, but I just, I get a lot of information that pans out, and there's a certain vibratory frequency. The hair goes back up in my neck, that type of thing. And so did anybody else come forth with that agenda, that maybe it was, just like 911 in New York? One of the possibilities was it was our own people that did it. And, I have some evidence there that it was definitely an inside job, just like Jim Marr says. So this would have been an inside job, just like the Twin Towers. Did anybody else come forth with that hypothesis?
Sure. Yes, actually, that was Corey Good said that was what his sources were telling him, that he identified a CIA-created Navy that was behind the missile attack, and that this is essentially a separate Navy that's run by the CIA, which has its own submarines, which has its own aircraft, which has its own aircraft carrier. So basically, there is an aircraft carrier battle group out there roaming the world, and that it's controlled by the CIA, and the CIA uses it for all sorts of covert operations. This is one of the things that is part of the history of the CIA. There are a number of sources and documents that substantiate that at different points the CIA took the steps to train its own people to be able to fly spy planes off of aircraft carriers, and that the Navy was not happy with the CIA using Navy aircraft carriers. So thereby you had the CIA creating the operational context for it being given its own aircraft carrier. And the same thing with ballistic missile-carrying submarines. So there are documents that substantiate what Corey Good told me, because Corey, he got his sources behind. And I have to say, I know some of Corey's sources. I have met them. We're talking about his sources that he refers to as the Earth Alliance, and these are credible, very credible people that have vetted Corey, and basically they believe he is 100% legitimate. So they're just corroborating what I've felt or researched since early 2005, that Corey's information is very, very credible and really needs to be considered very seriously. So here's information that this was a CIA faction wanting to create a third world war, or at the very least a major regional war in North Korea. I think is very close to the mark. That I do believe that this is what was going on. And as for who shot it down, well, that's a separate question. But I'm happy to follow up on this whole CIA. He calls it the Dark Fleet that roams around doing all these covert operations.
It would have been possible for them to launch it from space, like an enemy from space launched it, and then another one took it out.
Well, that was what Cobra said. He said that this was a space-based weapon that was launched against Hawaii and that it was intercepted. Well, certainly, anything is possible here. But the thing is, if the goal was to simulate a North Korean ballistic missile attack on Hawaii, there's no point in having a space-based weapon because North Korea doesn't have space-based weapon systems. The only countries that have space-based weapons at the moment of any significance are Russia, the United States, and there's no way in the world to attack the United States.
So you're saying that once it would have landed, you're saying that once it would have hit, then the U.S. would have slowed down enough to determine where it came from before they hit the return button, fired back?
Well,
or would somebody just be hot on the button and just launch because they want to start World War III and so they wouldn't even bother about where it came from, just that it happened on U.S. soil?
Right. Well, one of these sources I quote in the last article was a space-based weapon system. One of the sources I cite in there was working at Hickam Air Force Base during the alert, and he describes basic that they were tracking the missile, that the missile was tracked, and that it was basically shot down, but that a request was put into the White House to retaliate against North Korea, that people had tracked this missile and had determined its origin. It's not very hard to track a ballistic missile because there's all sorts of kind of space surveillance systems out there. And, of course, you have the one in Maui, the Maui space surveillance system that can track. That's 24/7 tracking all sorts of objects. So, there's no great difficulty in tracking ballistic missiles. The difficulty comes in shooting them down. That's where you need to have something more sophisticated than these kind of missile systems that the Navy is developing through the Ige system, or that the Army is developing. And so basically, it wouldn't have been hard for them to track the missile. And according to this whistleblower from Hickam Air Force Base, a request had been put into the White House to retaliate. And when the White House refused to retaliate, then the call went out to describe it as a false alert. That even though the missile had been shot down, people still wanted the United States to retaliate. They still wanted the White House to retaliate, but Trump said no. I think Trump smelled a rat here, and he just kind of held off. And it was only after the White House refused to retaliate against North Korea, because the missile had been shot down, no danger anymore, but still they wanted to retaliate. The White House said no. Then they put out the false alarm.
Okay, we wonder why there was such a long delay, because to me it was obvious some story was being fabricated, or something's happened in between our phones going off and the retraction. What were you going to say, Sasha? You had a question or a comment? Sasha?
No, it's answered. That's very interesting that Trump would have said no when a lot of people say he's just been looking for his opportunity to take North Korea down before it gets even more dangerous. And so that's a very surprising response from the president.
So this is a source at the Hickam Air Force Base that said that,
what I
right?
want to know is what happened, what the discussion was in the cabinet room when he got the message that we've been attacked, even though we stopped it. This is our chance. Hit him, boss. What happened? Who advised him? What did they say? What was going on?
Well, this is really that is a key question, because I think maybe there was an assumption that Trump would retaliate, but according to the Hickam Air Force Base source, he basically said that there were people there that were counting on Trump retaliating. Maybe I should read it. There's the Hickam Air Force Base source. Do you want me to read it?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So this is what he said. Quote, Hickam Air Force Base fusion analyst here. The false alert was not a mistake. It was ordered. We were informed it was to be a drill, but then all information was put out the threat was real. Immediate contact was made to the White House and requests were made for retaliation. I think there was a push to have the White House approve an attack on foreign vessels off the coast. When the White House replied negative and demanded further information, my superiors called Governor David Ige, where he ordered us to contact media outlets out of there being a false alarm. One of the Governor aides was present and speaking with who looked to be a federal investigator. I overheard them state that this, quote, demonstrated weakness in the Trump administration and a refusal to protect his people, end quote. So right there, this Hickam Air Force Base analyst working at one of the fusion centers there, where you basically have government agencies fused in one center to basically facilitate command and control. It was very clear that this was a drill. They were told it was a drill. Then it turned out to be real. That the White House was told that Hawaii had been attacked, and there was an expectation that Trump would retaliate, and he didn't retaliate. And people were disappointed that he didn't retaliate, but that the governor, Ige, basically then requested that a false alarm be put out. And so that explains the long delay, why you had, after a few minutes, you had the governor and the police and so forth putting out that, the ballistic missile, that there was no threat any longer because it had been shot down. But, the extra time was needed because they were trying to decide whether to go ahead and retaliate. And if they had ordered the retaliation, then they wouldn't have said that this was a false alarm. They would have said, the major news would have carried the story, Hawaii attacked by North Korea, US declares war, or something like that.
Yes.
And so, we would be living a very different moment.
Right now, yes. So the Navy, where was this test that they did on January 30th? Was that here in Hawaii or another part of the world?
That particular test was here in Hawaii. I believe it was just off the coast of Kauai. They were basically trying to test, this thing. But the Navy had announced that it had failed. And I think that the Navy was sending a clear signal that, someone else had shot down this missile. It wasn't the Navy. And so that brings us back to, was it the Air Force Secret Space Program, or was it extraterrestrials? Yeah. And according to information that I've been getting, it was the Air Force Secret Space Program, probably working in collaboration with a group of Nordic extraterrestrials, because this has been one of the big developments over the last year, is that the US Air Force has suddenly discovered Nordic extraterrestrials, or human-looking extraterrestrials. And I'm saying that facetiously, because they've been around a long time, but the Air Force have only ever worked with the reptilians and the greys. But now the Air Force has realized that the reptilians and the Greys were basically deceiving them, that the German space program out of Antarctica and in South America was not sharing the kind of technologies that the Air Force wanted. And so the Air Force has decided that now it's going to start working with the Nordic extraterrestrials, and this is how they hope to basically get a lot more newer technology, bigger space craft, kind of like the Navy's secret space program. So there's a inter-services rivalry here that the Air Force has realized that the US Navy has its own space program that's deployed in deep space with space battle groups and so forth. And that the Air Force wants that.
I have a whistleblower here who actually is, T.J. Morris has been in the secret space program. We've talked about it at great length, and she hasn't really come out on a broad scale, but we brought her out, and we're going to try to get her on at the break. Matt was trying to get her on her Skype, but it wasn't working. But she has discussed the system in space, and they can see everything. They know instantly when anything is launched anywhere. So we'll try to bring her in on the break, and she will tell you what she knows about. She was in the military, and her husband was in the military, and they were stationed in around the Mars base, but in space. There's a series of 5 craft. There are about 1 million personnel each craft, and so we'll have her come on and tell what she knows. I felt bad that we couldn't get her on, but her Skype wasn't working. So we'll try her on the phone. But go ahead and continue. I'm going to text her and see if she's ready.
What motivated the executive to refuse to bomb? What made him say no?
I think Trump basically said no because he really is very aware of how dangerous it would be to launch a missile strike against North Korea, that this could easily escalate into a regional war and into a third world war, because China would step in, and I don't think China would allow the United States to take over North Korea. And so China would not have allowed that to happen. So that could have easily have led to a regional war. And I think Trump realized that the chances of this escalating were very great. And I think he's being advised by a lot of very senior military people. I mean, his Secretary of Defense is a 4-star Marine. His Chief of Staff is a 4-star Marine. His National Security Advisor is a 3-star Army general. So, you know, basically he's surrounded by military people, and they advise him, and they basically told him to hold off, get more information, which truly is the sensible thing to do, rather than being pushed into a retaliation when you don't know who's behind it. And so I think he was advised correctly, and he did the right thing. And so now it's become clear that this was an attempted false flag attack, and that the real culprit behind it was this CIA faction or the Dark Fleet that he has deployed out there. But I think there are, I think this is also a very important event, because it shows that our kind of global system has reached the point where I feel that we can now deal with these kinds of global emergencies, attempted false flag attacks orchestrated by these rogue factions, whether it's a CIA faction with a Dark Fleet, roaming the oceans, or whether it's a kind of German Nazi breakaway faction in Antarctica or in South America, or whether it's the Cabal, the Illuminati. The people behind these false flag attacks, they're always a small minority. They're only a small minority in any institution. So they can only pull these things off through stealth and trickery, and by people not being on guard. But now what we have is all around the world, militaries are cooperating much more than they ever have to not precipitate any crisis that might be a result of a third party trying to, through a false flag attack, trying to bring about a major regional war. And I think what we see with Hawaii is an example of this, that the US acted very carefully in terms of first trying to identify who was behind the attack, and then once they worked it out, realizing that it was a CIA faction, that they couldn't publicly declare that that the US that Hawaii was attacked by the CIA, so they had to put out the information that it was a false alarm. But behind the scenes, they're dealing with the CIA for doing this, or that rogue faction of the CIA, because a lot of the people in the CIA are kind of like doing rank and file. They're very responsible. The rank and file typically just doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of protecting the national interest. But it's these covert groups that are the problem.
There's still a chain of investigation from the person who didn't have this public talk with two other people that are witnessing him, and there's complicity somehow, at least in this falsifying of what the message was and shushing it, and there's some kind of inside thing happening in the people that were supposed to give the warning or not give the warning. That really needs to be investigated publicly. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, that's right. Yes, the state of Hawaii did do an official investigation, and in that official investigation, they basically put all the blame on one particular person and a poorly designed reporting process and a lot of confusion. So, and they're trying to get the public to buy into this idea that it was just really one person who didn't hear that this was just an exercise, that all the person heard was that this is not a drill, but in fact the message began exercise, 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 and ended with the same three words, but in the middle of that it said it's not a drill. Well, right there you have confusion, and that they're trying to say that this is what caused it, but I think what it is that this is a cover-up, that they want people to believe that this was just a false alarm, when in fact it was an attempted false flag attack, and that if the public is informed of the truth, then we can make great inroads in basically taking down these kind of rogue entities operating around the world without any oversight.
Have you gotten any reports about the rogue entity that launched the missile? Have they been taken out, or are they still lurking to do it again?
Well, I mean, the really interesting thing was that only 2 days after the missile attack on Hawaii, there was another false alarm for Japan, and in that case, it was Tokyo. And the major public broadcaster in Tokyo, that's the government-run television station, basically ran an alert. And so you had the same thing happening in Japan. People believed for a certain amount of time, I don't know how long it was, probably 15 minutes, 30 minutes, somewhere in that range, they believed that Japan was going to be attacked by North Korea. So, what that indicated to me was that the submarine that had been responsible for the Hawaii attack lurked around in those waters off the Sea of Japan, and then did the same thing against Japan, and that very likely you had the same outcome of the missile being shot down. Because we're talking about a ballistic missile capable submarines that operate for covert programs. So these are very difficult to track, and the CIA doesn't want anyone tracking them. But now, because of this false flag attack, now the military, I imagine that they are now going to be doing what they need to do to kind of neutralize or to basically prevent the CIA from ever being able to do this again. Taking away their assets or destroying some of the assets like these ballistic missiles or these ballistic submarines that the CIA used for this false flag attack.
About a month before, they installed a new air system here, air alert system, which has a different sound to it. It sounds terrifying. It's just like what you heard in World War II, right? It's different than our, we're going to get a tsunami. We're not afraid of tsunamis here, but boy, it was terrifying. And they did a test, I think it was just a month before. So this is all kind of coincidental, quote unquote, right? They just tested the new one, and Maui just said, please, we don't want you to test that again. You did it once, but don't test that again because it's just wakens up, these nightmares from too many people. So they didn't put that alarm. We know it works. We heard it, but they didn't blast that alarm. So that was another thing that was weird. If it really was a incoming missile, why didn't they use the island-wide alarm system that they just tested about a month before?
Right. I think that kind of addresses this question of, they intercepted and took down the missile pretty quickly. Only a few minutes later, after the alert went out, that I think it was just a few minutes that Pacific Command was already starting to let people know that, that there was no incoming missile. So I think from that we can assume that the missile had been destroyed, but it took them another 30 minutes to work out whether or not there was going to be a retaliation, whether there was going to be any official announcement that this was a cause for war against North Korea, and when that didn't happen, then they decided to go with this kind of fake missile alert. So that may be why it didn't go ahead with that drill. But I heard from people that the sirens were going off in Oahu, that the military facility at Pearl Harbor, for example, that the sirens were blaring. So people at Pearl Harbor, did believe that this was the real deal. Things were happening.
Right.
Well, maybe one way to get some kind of handle on the CIA is to make the funding more public and not have them off the books where they're not. And that's the way you control them. And their secret fleet is you control the money. You need to know where our money's going.
Right. Yes. That's one way. But the thing is that the CIA has been in establishing, creating, using all sorts of means of revenue, the drug trade, kind of pump and dump economics on Wall Street, kind of white-collar crime, invest black gold, all of these things that the CIA has been doing for decades now, raising enormous amounts of money to fund these black programs. And then you have the covert operations, where you basically have plausible deniability, where the right hand can genuinely say, I don't know what the left hand is doing, and that's been part of the way the covert operation system has been set up ever since Eisenhower. The national security system is set up in a way where they do want covert operations to be able to go forward. So it just means that how do you bring an institution like the CIA, which has its own separate funding, its own dark fleet, its own worldwide assets, how do you kind of like bring that to heel? It's a tough one. The thing was, Fletcher Prouty, he wrote a book called The Secret Team, and interestingly enough, he said that President Kennedy faced the same dilemma. And what Kennedy did was he decided to basically put all the covert programs, published I think it was the Operations Coordination Board, This was a kind of interagency board that was responsible for covert operations right up until the Kennedy administration, and he abolished that. And he decided to put all covert operations under the control of the military. And that sounds to me the way it should go, that you should have something like Special Operations Command, which is based at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, that the people in charge of Special Operations Command, that they are the ones that basically provide oversight of everything that the CIA is doing. And that was Kennedy's solution. Of course, he was assassinated because he was taking on the CIA and the secret control groups. But I think that's what Trump should do.
Was this the Defense Information Agency that was supposed to bypass the Dulleses?
There was a number of things that Kennedy did to basically circumvent the power of the CIA. Eliminating this. I believe it was called the Operations Coordinating Board, or something like that. But he eliminated that board, which was responsible for covert operations, and it was in the National Security Council system. He abolished that board and basically gave the powers that board previously had, handed them over to the Pentagon. And I think that's what we are going to be seeing here under Trump, that because of this event, that the Pentagon is now going to get oversight of this, dark fleet. So, I think you think of it logically in terms of, how does the Pentagon respond to this CIA dark fleet that launched this false flag attack against Hawaii? Do you destroy it? Well, there's a lot of people on that fleet that were probably told, oh, this is just a drill. And the people on the submarine, probably a lot of them would have been former Navy personnel that are now working for the CIA, and they would have been told, oh, this is a drill, launch this ballistic missile at Hawaii. It's just a dud, no problem. It's just a test. So they probably did. So I think the military would realize that, there's no great advantage in shooting in destroying the submarine or destroying the aircraft carrier group that is run by the CIA. What we want to do is basically control it, bring it under the control of Special Operations Command out of Tampa. And so this is where, what's been happening over the last 12 months at Special Operations Command in Tampa is important, because this is where, we get into the question of, the US Air cooperating with these human-looking Nordics, and the Nordics have been making themselves seen around Special Operations Command at Tampa.
Wow.
So these Nordics aren't the tall whites that they have at like Creech Airport or Air Force Base, or the Anunnaki. You're saying it's a separate species, or are they related somehow?
It's a totally separate group. I mean, the tall whites out at Nellis Air Force Base, they are aligned with the grey German agenda. They are part of that, and they are one of the groups that has been keeping the Air Force in the dark. Kind of like, and you even see this if you read the Millennium Hospitality by Charles Hall. He actually describes this, how the tall whites Air Force, the capacity for interstellar travel, they only gave them the capacity for short interplanetary trips, to the moon and maybe Mars, but that was it. And they kind of like deliberately withheld the most advanced technologies from the Air Force secret space program. And so the Air Force people know that this has been going on for a long time. But what's happened just recently is, because they discovered that the Navy had been working for all these years with this Nordic group of extraterrestrials, and the Nordics had helped the Navy develop space battle groups that are capable of interstellar travel, that the Air Force says, we don't want to be an effing Coast Guard for the planet. We want to have the good stuff. So we're going to start working with the Nordics, and that's what's happened. that the Air Force has now begun working with the Nordics, and there are a lot of signs of this, and that one of the conditions would have been that the Nordics would have, I think, cooperated with the Air Force in shooting down this ballistic missile. But that was probably a kind of joint operation where the Nordics would have, let the Air Force people know, hey, there's something coming your way, pay attention, you got to shoot this down. And they did. I think that this is probably the sign of a new era that is entering our planet, which is that the world's major military actors are now working with benevolent extraterrestrials, or more ethical extraterrestrials. That prior to this year, or prior to last year, there had been a big division where you actually had the Air Force Secret Space Program had been working with the dark side, with the CIA, with the tall whites, the reptilians, and the Germans. But now the Air Force guys are on the side of the angels, and this shooting down of that ballistic missile is the first tangible sign of the Air Force doing this.
We'll be back in 5 minutes after this commercial break, and we'll learn more about how this is organized. See you in 5 minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Looking for a nightcap to fill your listening needs? Come join us on Spaced Out Radio with me, Dave Scott, right here on Revolution Radio. Monday through Friday for 3 hours a night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we will take you down the supernatural path. From ET contact to the paranormal and all of the spiritual, cryptid, and conspiracy stories in between. You can find us right here on Revolution Radio, at spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show. Spaced Out Radio. It's a night of talk and interaction. Are you experienced?
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, aloha. Welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos with your host, Janet Kara Lessin, and Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. And we're trying to get one of our other co-hosts, Teresa J. Morris, on, and a mad painter, our producer, Thomas Becker. We'll attempt to pull her into the station because she has information about the secret space program. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to the donation button on what is it called? Revolution.radio website, and donate what you can. $1, $5, $15, $20, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation. Ahmad, where are we in the count? Are we way behind? Catching up?
We got $592, and we need 27, so that's a need of 2108. So please give.
Please,
it's early, and we're only a week in, so.
Oh, good.
TJ
Dr. Lessin, are you there? She's joined us. Okay, hold on one moment, TJ. We'll introduce you. Sasha, are you there? Just make sure everybody's back.
I'm here. Yes, Steve. Here comes TJ. Wonderful. Good to have you back, TJ.
Yeah. Hi, TJ. So,
hi, Dr. Lessin. How are you? Great.
We're doing great.
And I want to introduce you to Dr. Michael Salla. And Dr. Salla, this is Teresa J. Morris, and she's our co-host. We've been working together since about 2012. And we've had her describe a lot of times what her involvement was with the secret space program. She and her husband were both involved. And the first half of the show, we're talking about the secret ballistic missile attack on Hawaii. So, TJ, what do you know about the monitoring system that can tell when there's something incoming?
Okay, what did you ask, Janet? You're asking me about incoming what? Missiles?
Right. So the missile was launched. You told me a couple weeks ago that they can see, there's a system that can see anything that gets launched from anywhere instantly.
Oh, yeah. Like anything nuclear. Well, sure. We have a control system above the planet. Our government and I guess you could say the Nordic government. How's that? Happy birthday, Janet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, Michael, let's talk about the organization. We took a break, and we were talking about the Nordics, and this is a new species that's working with the United States. Is that correct?
The Air Force has realized that the Nordics are most likely going to help the Air Force develop the kind of advanced technologies that the other extraterrestrial groups had denied them. But the price for doing so was that the Air Force would basically need to do more of the kind of positive things in terms of disclosure, helping release some advanced technologies, and really kind of cut down on some of these darker activities that had been happening around the planet. And so this is something that is very new. It only really began last year, and I think we are witnessing the results of that. And I know, for example, I have a contact that lived near the MacDill Air Force Base, which was the home of Special Operations Command, and he was being taken up into the Nordic ships and also into the Air Force ships, and that he was talking about the Nordics and the Air Force people collaborating. And the thing is, he had photos. He had good quality photos, and I put them up on my website. I think I have about a dozen articles about him and the photos and what they tell us. But the bottom line is that beginning early 2017, the U.S. Air Force has begun cooperating very closely with a group of human-looking Nordics. These are extraterrestrials that really kind of look like us. I don't think it's just one group. There are many different groups of Nordics that are part of an alliance or a council. People have different names. Some call it the Andromeda Council, some call it the Super Federation, some call it the Galactic Confederation. Many different names, but essentially you have an association of human-looking extraterrestrials that are in competition with the reptilians and the greys and the insectoids. And that the Air Force made a strategic decision early last year, to begin working with this human-looking group. And I think that is leading to some pretty major changes.
Interesting. TJ, can you describe the group that you worked with, that the military has treaties with?
Sure. We have various levels, but universally, it's more like universal life. It's just that during the time that Tompkins was alive, I lived during the time and worked for President Reagan, so did Tom, and he wanted to know more. But our service in uniform was 80 to 93, is it Dr. Salla or Mr. Salla?
Yeah,
it's a doctor.
Dr. Salla. I'm sorry I've never talked to you before. I'm familiar with your work and that you're in Hawaii, and I think that's wonderful. I don't know how much you know about reality, but this is my real world, and my real world is multi-leveled. And I work in a 7-layered reality that's as real to me as my 3D dimensional form. So I'm not sure how to speak to you because I don't know what level of you'd almost
let's talk about your involvement in the you and Tom and her husband Tom were both in the military. You were in the Navy. What were you in? The Navy primarily, and then you wore all the uniforms.
I was joint. The Navy. Yeah, I went to San Diego first, where Treasure Island, and I worked with them out of Great Lakes. But I went to boot camp in Orlando, Florida. It's no longer there. From Orlando, I was a rehire from before I was in before. And that was because of my psychic abilities and intuitive and my connection with my family in White Sands, New Mexico. My uncle's working in NASA, my husband working at NASA. So I would be considered, in Tompkins' story, one of the Nordic women. But I was brought in 67. 1967. So I had the original MG-12 package. I had like Tompkins package, things like that. That was because they were paperwork that was here on the planet before I physically got here in this life. But I have memories of all past lives. So it's pretty interesting for me because it's like talking at a consciousness that knows itself prior to this reality.
Right.
So they incorporated all that into my reality here.
So let's just focus, because we're going to go back to Dr. Salla, but I just wanted to catch him up with. So the 5 ships that were up in space around Mars, what type of personnel? What type of people?
Well, we run it just like we do.
People.
We run it.
The extraterrestrials.
Yeah, it's like joint, just like we do underground here with Air Force, Army, Navy. The Army down here, but when Tom would do Army, I would do Navy, but we weren't joint sometimes. But up there, it's 5 ships. The story that you like to know about is we have a fleet. They look like naval, like I was on the Nimitz. It looks like a carrier on the water, but we have them in space. And I've got, Tom's hand-drawn, and I haven't drawn any because they wouldn't let it to be known down here because it was all a conglomeration from back with Hitler and all that he did. So as far as I'm concerned, there's 2 factions, and the Dracos and Reptilians are one. And I don't know about the aviary other than all the men in the CIA that worked on it while I was here, Bob Moore, all of them. Then we had the spheres, and those come and go in various colors. And then I worked with the people that were called above the galaxies, they're universal level. So I worked with what's called the Supreme Allied Command. And they were in my group, when I was growing up on the planet, we were told to not do the Ashtar Command stuff. Remember Bob Gray's mom was training me and stuff like that. Phil Gray. Right. Whoever wrote the guy, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Oh, John Gray. Yeah.
John Gray. Yeah. But I had
what
a human.
About on ship you told me before, were they humanoid? That's what I was getting to, that one thing. And what colors were they?
They look like you or me. Yeah, we have those that come and go. But Janet, all I ever knew were we were human, just at various levels of understanding. That's why I decided to go in the Navy. Or go into the military after talking with J. Allen Hynek and Ruth Montgomery. I realized a lot of people didn't know what I knew, and I was told to keep it quiet because my uncles worked in the government. My aunt worked when she brought in the Shah of Iran. A lot of the stuff they were destroying, and my family was all about government artifacts and keeping things from the past where people could know. But, working on the planet, the government wasn't that big because we all thought people would panic if they knew what was going on, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So the people I worked with, Tom and I worked, he was like Tompkins. He worked, Tompkins was a disseminator of information because he was born into it. He was chosen, I was chosen, Tom was chosen. You're chosen by those above, and then they choose you to do your work down here. And at some point in the all essence of free will, we choose to do this down here, whether we come in conscious memory or not. So that's a whole long story. But everybody's going for it. But the fact that we have them up there, a lot of people don't understand, and they're getting it all confused with various people that are coming out and talking about it. And you have to know what level of consciousness these people have. It's almost like saying, well, what job did you do in space? And right now we're going through tribal civilization recognition on the planet. Everybody's coming out. Sort of like an awakening consciousness all over the planet. And various people are wanting to talk now, which they didn't. Right. And I guess you could say that a certain facet of the government was wanting to keep it quiet because it was controlled. But Tom and I knew that our people, the Supreme Allied Command, they didn't want these people and these researchers coming and going. And so during the experiment of the World War II on this planet, they came and went and observed. But I work with people that were, I would call them, even though we understand linear and other ways of talking about time and space and gravity, is the fact that up there, I met people that had been living for hundreds of thousands, and so did Tom. And when they'd come down here, they'd pick their language and pick their sleeve or their host or their I hate to say it.
So they would basically come into an avatar. That's what you're saying? And the avatar would be human. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they were still born. They were still born through the holes. You know, the human form. They still came through two legs.
They still came through the birth process. Okay, let's go back to Dr. Salla. So, go ahead. Just wanted to interject a little bit of how complicated this whole thing is. But, okay, so we were talking about Tompkins, and I met you in MUFON in July, and my table was right across from Bill Tompkins, and I photographed, I have to send it to you, photographed you with Bill and Bob Wood. So what happened to the book? Is that going to happen, or has that project been dropped?
Bill Tompkins?
Yes. Weren't you working on a book with him?
I'm working with, yes. There's actually a couple of books that were proposed. You know, one was a co-written book between Bob Wood, Corey Good, Bill Tompkins, and myself. That one is still is in the kind of birthing process, to put it kind of kindly. The other one is a kind of second edition of Bill Tompkins' autobiography, and I'm helping Bob Wood with the birthing of that. And so Bob has been kind of working diligently in getting that ready with a few others, a couple of other editors. And so we're looking at probably realistically at this stage, probably the middle of the year, that the second volume of Bill Tompkins Selected by Extraterrestrials will come out. And so that'll just kind of like come out with a bit more detail into Bill's relationship with the Nordic extraterrestrials. I think TJ really kind of like was emphasizing this lifelong connection people have with different groups, and you're chosen to play a specific role. Well, that's exactly what it was with Bill. He was chosen. He's actually, and one of the things that I can say now, because he's passed from the scene, is that he said that his mother was a Nordic, and so that was why he was born with this capacity to be able to link in with the Nordics, because there needs to be, I think what TJ said about consciousness, you've got the right consciousness, that's important, but you also need to have the right genetics too. That you cannot be a good conduit for Nordic extraterrestrials. Your genetics are reptilian, for example. It's just not going to work, even though your consciousness, because you can have very highly evolved kind of reptilians who are very spiritual and in galactic consciousness and so forth, but their genetics don't put them into that framework, into that way. So you need to have the right genetics, you need to have the right consciousness. So Bill Tompkins had both. He had the right genetics from his mother, and his consciousness was right because Bill himself was a starseed. He was part of the Nordic space fleets, and he had come down here with a mission, and that's what he was doing, and so it's really been great working with him closely over the years that he came out. And I continue to kind of work with people that are trying to keep Bill's memory alive, through this new book that's coming out. And but he really did emphasize the positive role of the Nordic extraterrestrials, and I think his testimony was probably very critical in the Air Force reevaluating exactly what all this information about kind of like a Navy secret space program is all about. Because I think up until 2016, the Air Force thought that all of the people like Corey Good talking about space battle groups out there that, you know, that they were really just hallucinating or they were being deceived. But when Bill Tompkins came out with his information, I think that really forced the Navy, that really forced the Air Force to look closely at this information and arrive at the conclusion that, you know, over the years, over the decades, that the reptilians and the Greys had lied to the Air Force, that they had no intention of ever giving them advanced technologies that make them capable of deep space operations, that they denied them that. But that at the same time, the Navy was getting help from this group of Nordic extraterrestrials. And so I think the Air Force have basically now aligned themselves with the Navy, with the Nordic extraterrestrials. And I think that's part of the reason why you know, we're starting to see a lot of positive changes on the planet in terms of, like, you know, the cabal being arrested, being taken to Guantanamo, the secret indictments, the presidential executive order confiscating the financial assets of anyone involved in human rights abuses or international corruption. These are very positive changes, and I think we're going to see more and more of those.
Hey, Dr. Salla. I was just going to say that I met Bill Tompkins out in California in a hangar. It was prearranged for me to meet him. I've never told anybody that. You're the first.
Well, tell us that story. How did you meet Bill Tompkins and what?
All right, but I think Dr. Lessin had a question or comment.
Okay.
Dr. Lessin?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, TJ. Yeah, Michael, it's. I've been talking to some other people that make me think that it's kind of it's not a black and white thing with the Greys. Like Susie Hansen, for example, says that basically the Greys have an empathetic sense of other beings, and from their perspective, they're trying to teach us to empathize with one another and not be so hostile toward one another. And a hybridization program is to benefit humanity. And so I'm not sure about this. It almost seems like good guys, bad guys, but I feel there are peaceful, loving help in both directions. And, you know, one of the reasons for withholding information from something like the Air Force is that they might use it to kill people.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right that there are nuances here that, you know, we don't want to say all kind of Greys and all reptilians are kind of evil beings, because they're not. You know, there are good ones in there, and I know that. But always it's, you know, it's like I always, you know, use the analogy of Nazi Germany. It was only like 30% of the Germans that voted for Hitler to come into power. And then, of course, every German around the world is considered to be a supporter of Nazism, which is ridiculous. And I think it's the same thing with the Greys and the reptilians, that, you know, the leadership of these groups often do align themselves with some dark forces, but that, you know, the majority or many of you know, the rank and file groups, you know, maybe disagree, or maybe they go renegade, maybe they cross over to the other side. So, and it's the same for the Nordics or the human-looking extraterrestrials. You know, we know that just because you're blonde, blue-eyed doesn't mean you're angelic. I mean, a lot of the Nazis were blonde, blue-eyed, and they did terrible things. So, yeah, you're right. You know, we need to be careful of the nuances, you know, and be wary of generalizing. You know, but I think it's kind of like we're trying to understand a phenomenon where we're only given bits of the puzzle, and we use these generalizations to just try to understand. But certainly not all Pleiadians are positive angelic groups. Certainly not all reptilians or draconians are dark, malevolent groups, you know, entities either.
Oh,
Right.
thanks, Michael. It's just particularly that the hybrids that are here now among us need to be honored and welcomed. Just like in California, we didn't want the children that grew up with our children to be sent back to Mexico just because their parents were illegal entries. It's the same kind of thing. The people that are here, whatever their genetics, are here, and we got to get along. That's what it looks like to me.
So, TJ, back to how you met Bill Tompkinson and what capacity were you working with him? What was going on?
Well, I was always told about different people because of the NASA days, because remember, I was coming and going out of NASA when they were walking on the moon, right? So my husband worked directly for Chris Crafts at the NASA level. And then inside there was always the engineers, and we talked with different groups. And, people had contracts like at TRW, but we talked about Douglas. I always thought of McDonnell Douglas. And then Northrop, North American, what was the other one? There was 4 majors. But Bill's story goes with Corsos because of my living and knowing what I knew before I got here, and then putting it together with, having to be me, like the Taken story, little Allie Clark story, right? Steven Spielberg, when I had an office over in Hollywood and California, and I was doing my readings and doing my psychic work.
Yeah,
so I was in California.
You remembered being extraterrestrial before you came into human form. I'm deciphering. Right, is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Okay. And when you're born and you remember when I was little, and then they started entertaining me, and then I had one that educated me, and then, in a school here, and then going to White Sands and seeing the ships. And then it was unique because, I had, before I married a guy and he worked for NASA, my family was already involved with the government. My uncles worked in the Air Force. My aunt worked for the government. She was really beautiful, and they brought the Chaviran over, and then I knew the Bushes and Houston and, all the multimillionaires. And, I was I was on Agent Orange. And go ahead.
So what happened with Tompkins? Let's forget where we were.
I was being indoctrinated into my role between Ames, NASA, the government, CIA, National Security Agency, keeping all this quiet to bringing it out, a soft disclosure. And we didn't call it that back then, but, back then there was Alfred Lambermont Weber, and there was another Alfred, anyway, there was one in Africa. But I never talked to Michael Salla. I knew about his work, but I don't know who started, because I've gotten into, different people claiming the word exopolitics.
How did you?
Tompkins didn't know about any of that. He didn't know about any of that. He was on the inside. He was an inside man. I met him in a hangar bay. It was prearranged by one of the companies, either Douglas or Northrop. I don't remember the name on the outside of the hangar. But he was one of the old guys, and the young guys that worked for a company had me bring a load in. Tom and I bring a load. We were pulling into the U.S. Treasury from Denver and came out to California. But
so you were driving your truck. That's what you were.
I was driving.
Your cover was driving your truck. Yeah. To get in and out of the facilities. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't have my uniform on. I was taking cleared, we'll say, parts for spacecraft. We were delivering stuff, because we used to go underground and stuff, right? But we were delivering it. But for some reason, some of the guys that worked on this particular project wanted me to meet Billy. Now these guys called him Billy, so I thought, because my name was Semyase, like a sign of respect. It's like working in a karate studio, Semyase. But I thought they were talking about the other Billy over in Switzerland or Europe or somewhere. But that's what I thought. And I thought, God, he's old. But they were like, no, this is, the son. So this would have been 10 or 15 years ago. But we knew we were going to do what we're doing now, but we were on a time frame for the Nordics and the government as to when we could talk. But I came after him, so now's my time. I had to wait till, Tom said he didn't want me talking. And then I met with Bill, but he's like one of the old guys, and that was going to be fine for him. So now I can fill in all the Navy parts and, back to, I don't know the history like Tom does. but I do know what I know from up above the planet. And how, they came and how they only observed. But with Bill, I just knew he was one of the older guys. They introduced me. They really wanted me to meet him for some reason. We didn't spend more than 30 minutes together in the hangar. They rushed him off like he was some important guy. But they intentionally had me do my job and then had me stay in the hangar. And Tom wasn't with me, so I had my own truck at that time. So they had me only. Right. But Tom didn't know who I was, remember? He just thought I was some person come out to get him.
So you didn't know why they had you meet. They just had you meet and you hung out for 30 minutes.
They said he was working on the same. He was one of the older guys working on the project. But see, somebody arranged it. It's like the German people that work with our government in underground and work because they're all up on the Nordic stuff or the reverse engineering. And Tompkins was one of the guys that knew about it because his boss, he was there when they had the guys come over, the Navy guys, 39 to 42 in the beginning during World War II. So Tompkins had the original, like me and Tom were operatives. We worked for the intelligence agency. And he was like me and Tom. See, Tom, me, and Bill didn't have a degree. We weren't in the disinformation, misinformation, government academics, nor were we in the religious. We were just curious souls. And so we came in, I think, to do this kind of work. We stay off of the line of too legal or too political, too religious. What's the other one? And too medical. We can take it all and be objective, which everybody should be. Okay. So that was one of the good reasons people like us got chosen. At least that's my take on it. I don't know what his take is, but we only introduced each other. We talked about the basically we had a real quick talk about the alien spacecraft kind of thing.
Okay.
At the Semyasi level.
Okay, back to Dr. Salla.
I was just interested where did the thing occur?
We can't hear you.
You mentioned it was in a hangar.
What kind of hangar was it?
I was just asking TJ, where did you meet?
I remember two places. One was in Dayton, Ohio, and one was in California. I drove all over the country, and I delivered all over the country. But to tell you the truth, I have a vision if I could take it out and show you the video, but I don't know how to do that for you. But I don't remember if it was in California or Dayton, Ohio, because I delivered both. But he was brought in for one and for a meeting. I think I want to say California, or it could have been Dayton, Ohio. But it wasn't Albuquerque, I don't think. I don't think it was...
what part of California? What city?
I delivered all over, from San Diego. I delivered Long Beach, San Diego, all the military base up north, all over California. I was all up and down California. And then all over 80 and 40, all the military base. I pulled for the government, U.S. Treasury, Microsoft, the contractors. We haven't we haven't stopped this narrative. We're just starting the narrative. It's just that most people don't know how it all works. They don't know the different levels of government or how they can get off planet or the different alloys and all of that. And I don't even know how much he knew because he was sort of going out. He was an old guy that had worked. And then I came in I was in 67, but I didn't wear a uniform until 1993. But when I signed the new contract, Janet, in Fort Hood, they made me take the ASVAB again. So when I pulled a truck, I got the job out of Fort Hood. Remember, they moved me from Hawaii to Texas. And that's when I got on Tom's case. So I met him between 85 and 93. Excuse me, wrong. I met Bill Tompkins, but they called him Billy in the space in the hangar. A friend, he had two friends that really powerful people, and they wanted me to meet him. They were like big shots, contract government, like skunk work kind of people. Anyway, they wanted me to meet him, but okay, Janet, help me here. 95 till 2000, you and I, 93. I met him between 95 and 2002. And I couldn't tell you what year, but 95, a 7-year period. And I should have got over to that UFO Congress like I was supposed to, but I was also supposed to meet Stan and Richard Dolan. I haven't met them either. So you remember, because Dennis wanted me to meet him in Roswell, and I didn't. But Stan and I worked in 2006, Stanton Friedman.
Right.
And Richard Dolan came way later.
Okay.
Now, Robert Wood came into my life when I met you. On the line in 2011 is when Robert Wood came in to the story, Bob Wood.
Okay.
Maybe Dr. Salla can tell us when Bill met Bob Wood.
Sure. Yeah. It was in 2009. And Bill Tompkins moved from Portland, Oregon, down to San Diego in the year 2000. And so maybe that's where he could have met with TJ at some warehouse, because I know when he moved down to San Diego, he continued to work with the Navy League and also was a consultant for the Navy's Secret Space Program for their annual West meeting down there in San Diego. So he
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, probably was San Diego. That's where the Qualcomm Stadium is.
Okay, so you think maybe that's where you met him at the stadium for one of the Navy West meetings?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
I remember the Qualcomm Stadium because I was using a Qualcomm in my truck. So I don't know what that means. It just means Dr. Lessin would know better about that in the video in my head. Relation. Okay.
Yeah.
But this whole thing fits together with Janet, Dr. Lessin, me, Allied Command Organization, and Dr. Lessin has got first it was Janet and Dr. Lessin got approved to work with me, but I didn't know how that was going to go for years. And they never knew really what all I was talking about, because I never told them very much. Because Janet worked as a contractor, but Dr. Lessin worked at the university. So, but he was highly, highly intelligent and very open to the consciousness, very open-minded. So I'm just delighted, Dr. Salla, that you're doing the kind of work you're doing. And I hope we can all be on the same team. My team always worked with those above, and we also worked out of White Sands, and we worked with the Nordics. So, and that's who Bill, I guess I would have called him Mr. Tompkins. But when I met him, I thought he said, call me Bill. Is that what, you met him, didn't you?
Yes. He went by Bill. That's how what everyone called him, Bill.
That's what I thought. So maybe this other guy, I don't know why he did that, or if he did it intentionally to mess with my mind. I don't know. But anyway, they got me there, and I met him, but I don't know for what avail it was, other than right now, for this conversation right now. That's the only reason I can imagine. Other than I can speak his language, fore-aft, starboard, port. I know decks and ladders and Navy, and I know all the terminology. So I don't know that would help anybody, but go ahead, Janet.
So, TJ, when you're talking about the Nordics, we were talking about before you came on that there are different, the tall whites that are out at the Millennium Hospital. What's this guy's name? Oh, the guy that met the tall whites. That's a different type of humanoid than the Nordics Hall that are currently working. What's that?
Charles Hall.
Yeah. Yes. So he worked with a different type of Nordics than you did, apparently.
there's all types of, it's just a word on the planet because we are trying to learn how to speak to each other, just like semyase. Some people say semjase, and they think it's a woman. It's not. It's a sign of respect because we go between planets or we go between ambassador here or another level. It's a sign, like I said, at a dojo, they'll call them, I forgot what they call them. Anyway, sensei. Yeah. So that is, when you remember when I promoted that guy for a conference in California that you wanted me to, anyway, he called me and asked me to write that book and edit it for him. And he called me semyase.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's stay on topic here. Let's stay on topic. We get too far. Okay. So go ahead, Dr. Salla. We've got about 15 minutes or 10 minutes. Go ahead. Let's get back
about Nordics.
So the Nordics,
various Nordics.
The Nordics are working with. Explain to TJ who the Nordics are that are now working with us, and they're positive, and things are turning around. Let's go back to that.
Right. Okay. Well, the information I've gotten comes from a source who has been working or been living near Special Operations Command at MacDill Air Force Base, and he was being picked up by the Nordics and also being picked up by Air Force Special Operations, and they were basically tracking him in terms of the contacts he was having with the Nordics, and these, he describes them as human-looking, and he was describing the cooperation between the Nordics and the Air Force, how they have been very close over the last 12 months or so, and he's taken photos of some of the Air Force space program triangle vehicles, some of their rectangular vehicles, and some of the kind of like cigar-shaped Nordic vehicles all around MacDill Air Force Base, and so what his information has done is corroborate, what I've been told by Corey Good and what Bill Tompkins was saying, that there has been more and more cooperation at an official level between the Air Force and the Nordic extraterrestrials. And there was also a document released last year. It's a Defense Intelligence Agency document, and it basically gives another history of how the Air Force has been cooperating with these Nordic extraterrestrials. And that's the first time that the Air Force has ever leaked a document showing that they are aware of human-looking extraterrestrials and that they've been working with them. So I think all of this comes together because with this ballistic attack on Hawaii, I think that was probably a joint operation between Air Force Space Command or Air Force Special Operations and the Nordic extraterrestrial. They knew.
Oh, I don't know anything about what they do
shut it down
like that. Yeah, Janet and I were talking because she was really concerned, but I told her not to be. But it turned out to be the next day. She found out it wasn't. It was false. But I do more off planet and then organizing all of it. I guess you'd say we're in the process of doing Allied Command from 2018 to 2038.
But,
so
TJ,
we do things.
It wasn't a false flag. It was an actual that we found out there was actually a missile launched and it was taken down. So that's what we talked about the first hour. So you missed
I don't know about any of that. That would be something a little low key, probably just test, because we're not doing any of that level on the planet as far as I know. I mean, it's all dog and pony shows like the Koreans and stuff, but the Air Force, you got to realize, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all those are just like black, white, brown, yellow. We all work together. All countries work together, and all military work together. Russians, Koreans, I don't care who it is. On the planet, we have all the different air forces. We have all the different space commands. Everybody works together. The differentiation is politics. just to keep people fighting among themselves.
That's what Joanne Richards
in reality,
said.
we don't do that. We don't do that. Why would we? We're all trying to achieve the same goal, get off the planet. So why would we, why would we?
So why do we have the division in the politics and the fake wars? What's all?
I don't know. It's all I know is I was told we were always observing because there's only the faction, because everybody that I work with, you would call them benevolent. All those, including the Greys, remember? And I told you, Tom and I say, well, they put them back. Remember, there's some that are rogue. They weren't supposed to get through our group. And the only ones that we were concerned about.
There's rogue Greys. You're saying
there's
rogue
some,
Greys.
well, research period. We don't care if they're blue, yellow, pink, white. There's gray, there's tall gray, there's short gray, there's Japanese-looking grays, 3.5 feet, 5 feet. It's like you just talking about people on the planet. We're all them and they're all us. The awakening is the fact that we are they and they are us, and we've never left. There's nothing not going on now that hasn't always been going on, other than sometimes there's planetary shifts. Are we, like I have memories of being when Mars was, in my memory, I remember leaving Mars and that used to be in the habitable zone. And then when a planet was destroyed, I remember all that, leaving the planet, just getting off before it got wiped out or hit. So those are in my memories. So I think that's part of why so many of us think about Mars, is because it was our original home. I don't know how we're going to, this is the planet that was moved into the habitable zone. And I don't know about the moon or anything. I have about that. But talking about all this is extremely complicated. And I admire Mr. Tompkins for coming out, because he's trying to say, here's my part. I lived during this part in the LA, and, this is what I did. And he tries to tell people, but unless people understand what he's trying to tell them, they don't get it. I get everything he says because I know it's true. I know what he's saying, and I understand exactly what he's saying, and I understand about the packages and the Navy operatives. I understand all of that because I lived it. I just happened to be 20 years later.
I think it's important to kind of like really point out that, on one level, there is cooperation, as you say, between the different militaries, between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans, and so forth. That there is a lot of high-level cooperation between them. But the thing is that you have this group, whatever name you want to give them, whether you call them the Cabal, the Illuminati, the Deep State, the Satanists, pedophiles, whatever name you want to give them, that these are a group whose history goes back many thousands of years. They're kind of troublemakers. They are always causing conflicts between major powers. That's how they basically have been able to control the planet. There's a book by William Brandley called The Gods of Eden, and I think probably you've talked about it in the past. He kind of nails it in that book. This has been something that's been going on for thousands of years, that every major conflict between major powers, that even though you have people at that kind of senior level cooperating, there's always this dark force, a third force, manipulating things to try and cause conflict, to try and cause wars, and that's what happened with this Hawaii attack. It was third force operating through the cause war between United States and China and Russia. That was.
I can't understand him.
we're
Even
having
the Chinese
and the Russians, you again, Dr. Salla.
But that doesn't mean that that even though there is collaboration at that top military level or discussion and dialogue, still, if there's a false flag attack that happens, like if they had succeeded in attacking Hawaii, then the United States would have been compelled to attack North Korea. And then that would have set off a chain reaction, which would have led to a regional or even a world war. And that's how this third force, how this kind of cabal operates.
Oh, you're talking about, every planet has that, but that's greed, and that's the government. Tom was involved in some assassinations. They sanitize. They know who they are pretty much, and they try to keep them under control on the planet. But that's the ones, I guess you'd say, that meet the powers that be. All the emperors know the emperors, and the kings know the kings, and all of that. They've got that level, and then they've got the kind that after World War II, the French underground. Tom went to Germany and worked in the underground there, and the Secret Service and the CIA, and they worked, by country. That would be called the European theater. So he learned a lot about these because they sent him over to China. And there's all kind of stories of getting rid of people trying to get too powerful on the planet, if you know what I mean. They do. They have
to assassinate the troublemakers. Is that what you're saying?
Basically,
he worked for Reagan. Where did he get his orders to assassinate? He was assassinating certain people?
Okay, well, the CIA
was that from Reagan or CIA?
The CIA at one time thought they were in control of that, just like they had the National Security Council, Homeland Security, and all that. They broke it all down after 9/11. But prior, we were in it before 9/11. And back then, the president still had a say-so. So Tom was supposed to... we would be in uniforms like we worked for the Army or Navy or whatever, where we got our training in the field, but once you get your training, then you're accepted and they'll buy your contract, the Central Intelligence Agency. But on the higher levels, some of the CIA think they're in control, and they find out people are forging signatures, or they didn't have as much control as they thought. That's what we learned. And back in the day when we were in, it was people siding up. There were black hats and white hats inside the intelligence agencies. And Reagan knew that, because after Eisenhower and then Reagan, some of the guys weren't telling Reagan everything either. And Bush, Clinton wasn't allowed to know. Reagan was somewhat. And that's why he sent Tom. But Tom, and to answer your question, would get hip pocket orders. After he explained to Reagan that he called a couple, they tried to send him out to assassinate somebody, but they wouldn't give him the full dossier, or they'd fly him in from the UK. So Reagan would only do one if Reagan gave him the order direct. And those were kept in one of the drawers, a secret drawer in the White House, in the desk they used. You know what I'm saying? He had a hard copy. And then he planted those all over. Yeah, and some of those were on the microfiche that were in the Pyramid Code, remember? The Pyramid Code, he put it in his own language. Yeah. Some of the reality or some of the history Tom lived through. That's why those guys came to meet him, because they didn't want all that going out there. But anyway, that's a whole nother story, too. But I get what you're saying, Dr. Salla. Yeah, you just got to look at life on the planet just like it is out in space, is the way I do it. Otherwise, I'd go crazy. We have beings, but I still prefer to work with those that feel like we're benevolent. But yes, every place, every space, everywhere we've taken people, I just know that they've taken them together. I was trained to know that sometimes they took a whole group together if they had the room on the ships. If they didn't, sometimes, some of them understand the slave race, and, I understand a lot more, but I just haven't been able to talk about it. Janet doesn't even know what all I know, and she's been working with me, since verbally since 2007. But she was coming into the psychic level, like the psychic, learning her skills, table tapping, working spiritually with Spiritual World Network and me when I was doing psychic fairs at the Hilton Hawaiian Village. And she came to a gig there. But she was going to train to do more in the Stargate program. And she went with Dr. Lessin. Dr. Lessin was going to run our center. He and Charles Muir had already met. Charles and him were helping people in the Tantra learning
the chakra. We're getting too far out there. Let's
sorry.
Let's go back. We're running out of time. That's okay. Yeah. Okay. So we've got about 3 more minutes. So Dr. Salla, would you like to wrap it up and wind it together here?
Yeah, you can have him back sometime, right? We can get together before. Right. Some other show.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I think what we're going to see now is just a lot of very positive outcomes, because there is this kind of growing cooperation between the Air Force, white hats in the military, white hats throughout all of the government institutions, increasing cooperation with the Nordic extraterrestrials, and that the system is being cleaned up. And the latest material that's coming out is there are negotiations happening right now with the secret space program that the Germans have been running out of Antarctica and out of South America. That Rex Tillerson just went down to the Bariloche down there, and also the Jeff Bezos went down there, and I think that's all part of this reaching an agreement. So I think we're going to see some very positive changes this year, and we're going to get a lot of information coming out, and it's just going to be a continuing process of more and more information coming out, more advanced technologies coming out, and I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. And I just want to thank you again, Janet and Sasha, for having me, and TJ for coming along. And people want to learn more about my material, they can just visit the website exopolitics.org.
Exopolitics.org. That's good.
What's your next book, Dr. Salla? Your next book's coming out. We're expecting you to. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, the next book is going to come out next month, probably the middle of March. It's going to be titled Antarctica's Hidden History, Corporate Foundations of Secret Space Programs. So I'm going to talk about Antarctica's history and how the corporations were involved in that, the German corporations, and then the American corporations, and now the transnational corporations, and how they've been collaborating and building multiple space programs in Antarctica and around the world.
Excellent. And then the Bill Tompkins, when is that revised version of Selected by Extraterrestrials coming out?
Right, that's the second edition of his autobiography,
right.
And I think that's going to come out probably sometime in the middle of the year. I anticipate June, July. It should be ready. But work is progressing, and that will come out.
And
did he ever
where are you going to be
mention
presenting? We're running out of time. Where are you presenting? Are you at
I'm going to be going to the Contact in the Desert at the end of in June, beginning of June. So I'll be there for that.
Okay, we'll see you there.
Yeah, I'll see you there.
Okay, so
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Most guys freeze. That's your cerebral cortex looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filling with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. Your heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move. Fear is not real. The only only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting